I thought I knew what betrayal felt like, but nothing, absolutely nothing prepared me for what my best friend did in my own bed. And here's the thing that nobody talks about. When you think karma is finally going to fix everything, sometimes it goes so far that you start begging the universe to stop. Because by the end of this story, I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted forgiveness. And that's when everything changed. This is the story of how the worst year of my life became a mirror I never asked to look into. Sarah and I met in college. Klitsch, I know, but it wasn't one of those surface-level friendships you scroll past on Instagram. We were the kind of friends who shared passwords, borrowed each other's identities without asking, and knew things about each other that we'd never tell another soul. For 12 years, she was my person. When my career fell apart in 2019, she was the one who picked me up at M from a parking lot where I cried for 3 hours. When she got diagnosed with anxiety, I held her through the panic attacks nobody else was brave enough to witness. We had that kind of bond, the unbreakable kind. Or so I thought. Then I met David. He wasn't special at first. He was just there, a friend of a friend at a party. But he had this quiet confidence, this way of making you feel seen without trying too hard. The first night we talked, it was for 6 hours straight. Sarah met him 2 weeks later, and I remember thinking, I actually remember this moment. I was nervous. Not because I didn't trust David, but because I didn't want her to feel replaced. Sarah had been my everything for over a decade. She smiled when I introduced them. "He's cute," she said. And then she hugged me and whispered, "I'm so happy you found someone who gets you." I should have known something was wrong. Because Sarah never wanted me to be happy with a man. Not out of jealousy exactly, but out of protection. She always said relationships were distractions. They made you smaller. She said it so many times that I'd started to believe it. Looking back, I think that's when it started. Not when she slept with him, but when she started convincing herself she was saving me. David and I dated for 8 months. Not long, I know, but in those 8 months, I felt something I'd never felt before. I felt chosen. I felt like my weirdness, the parts of me that Sarah had always protected me about, were actually the things he loved most. We talked about moving in together, about getting a dog, about the stupid, beautiful future plans that people make when they're in love. Then one Tuesday, I forgot my laptop at David's apartment. His spare key was still in my purse from when he'd given me one, and I was working on a deadline, so I let myself in. The first thing I heard was Sarah's laugh. Not just any laugh. The laugh she only did when she was nervous. I'd heard it 1,000 times. They didn't see me at first. I stood in the hallway watching my best friend of 12 years with her hands on my boyfriend's face, like she was memorizing it, like he was something precious that might disappear. And the worst part, the part that destroyed me more than any betrayal ever has, he looked at her like she mattered more than I did. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just left. And I did what women do when they're in crisis. I called my mother. I called my therapist. I sat in my car for 2 hours and tried to understand how the 2 people I trusted most in the world had rewritten my entire life without asking my permission. The excuses came quick. David said it was a mistake, one drunken night that meant nothing. Sarah said she was confused, that she'd always had feelings for him, that she'd been trying to protect me from someone who wasn't good enough. But here's what they didn't say. I'm sorry. Not really. Not the kind of sorry that changes anything. I cut them both off completely, blocked their numbers, deleted their pictures, burned the jewelry, did all the things you're supposed to do. And for 6 months, I felt nothing but rage. Then the messages started. David's first, asking if we could talk. Then Sarah's, longer and more desperate each time. They'd gotten together officially. She'd left her job to move across the country with him. And apparently, it was falling apart. I didn't read the messages at first, but my friend Emma, who worked in the same office as Sarah, started feeding me updates. She looks terrible, Emma said. She hasn't smiled in weeks. David's apparently having doubts. And I felt something I'm not proud of, satisfaction. Then David relapsed. He'd struggled with addiction before Sarah had told me this, but I didn't know the depth of it. He checked himself into rehab. Sarah was there every day, supporting him, believing in him. I was glad, actually. I didn't want him to suffer, but I also didn't care enough to intervene. The thing about karma is that it's not immediate. It's slow. It's watching someone who hurt you walk through every consequence you secretly wished on them, and realizing that none of it makes you feel better. None of it brings back the year of your life they cost you. Sarah got sick, really sick. Autoimmune disorder doctors said it was likely triggered by stress. She lost her job because of medical leave. She couldn't afford to stay in the city where David was in recovery. She had to move back home with her parents at 34 years old. And David? He stayed sober for 3 months, then checked out of rehab early. He and Sarah broke up. He moved to Portland with someone he met at a recovery meeting. By that point, Sarah had reached out to me 17 times. Voice memos, emails, a handwritten letter that took her 2 weeks to write because her hands were shaking from her medication. In that letter, she said something I'll never forget. I destroyed the person I loved most to save someone who couldn't be saved. And now I'm alone, and the person I destroyed won't even look at me. I didn't respond. I was still angry, but I was also something else. I was tired of winning. That's when things got darker. Sarah attempted suicide on a Tuesday. She didn't die. She texted me after she got out of the hospital. I didn't even think you'd care, which is why I wasn't expecting you to show up, but I had shown up. When the hospital called and identified me as her emergency contact, something she'd changed back after we'd cut contact. I'd immediately driven 2 hours to that hospital, and I sat with her. I didn't talk about David. I didn't talk about what she'd done. I just sat there while she cried and told me that the worst part of everything wasn't losing David or her health or her career. It was knowing that she'd earned the loss of the one person who'd always been there. That is when I understood something that changes the entire equation. I didn't want karma to hurt her anymore. I wanted her to survive it. Because watching someone you love, yes, I still loved her, which infuriated me, suffer the consequences of their own choices is the most painful thing I've ever experienced. Worse than the betrayal, worse than the heartbreak, worse than any of it. She told me something in that hospital that I think about every single day. I think I did this to myself so you'd have permission to forgive me. Like if I hurt myself enough, it would be even. And then you could let me back in. And that broke me in a way nothing else could have. Because she was right. She'd orchestrated her own destruction, and somewhere deep down, she was hoping that would be currency enough to buy her way back into my life. We didn't fix everything that day. We didn't become who we were before. That version of our friendship is dead, and I think we both had to grieve it. But we started rebuilding. Different, smaller, with boundaries, with honesty instead of protection. A year and a half later, Sarah is doing better. She's in therapy. She's not with David, he's in Portland, happy with someone else, sober as far as I know. And I've rebuilt my own life in a way that doesn't depend on either of them to define my worth. Here's what I learned that I wish someone had told me. Revenge and karma aren't opposites. They're the same drug wearing different clothes. Whether you're wishing bad things on someone or watching bad things happen to them, you're still letting them live in your head rent-free. The real power isn't in the punishment. It's in the choice to stop watching the clock, waiting for justice. Sarah asked me 6 months ago if I'd ever fully forgiven her. I said, I don't know, but I've stopped keeping score, and that feels like enough. She cried, and I held her, like I used to, before everything broke. Not because what she did was okay. It wasn't. But because holding on to the anger was poisoning me faster than it was ever going to hurt her. And at some point, forgiveness isn't about them. It's about you choosing to be alive again instead of just existing in the wreckage. Karma is real, but it's not what you think. It's not punishment from the universe. It's just consequences. And sometimes watching someone face those consequences teaches you more about yourself than any victory ever could. If you're waiting for someone to get what they deserve, I want you to think about what you're becoming while you wait. Because that's the real story nobody talks about. What was your breaking point? When did you realize that winning and being miserable were the same thing? Comment below. Seriously, your stories matter. And if you watch the next video, I am going to tell you about something even more shocking. What happened when David came back into our lives 3 years later? Spoiler alert, it involves a wedding, a pregnancy announcement, and a conversation that made me question everything I thought I knew about second chances.